So it's okay now. So we have a very interesting seminar today. We have two distinguished speakers. Full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Boris Porfiriev. The topic of his presentation is Coronavirus Pandemic 2020, Will the Green Trend Persist? And also the member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Alexander Shirov. His topic is effectiveness of economic support measures in the context of the COVID-19 epidemic. Both of them, as you know, are the leaders of the Institute for National Forecasting of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Boris Porfiriev is director of the institute, and Alexander Shirov is the first deputy director. So I hope that, and I am sure, in fact, that we are going to have two very interesting presentations, reports, and discussions. Now, as I have already told you, I will switch off. I will switch off the sound of all of us except for the speakers. Or probably I'll ask to do this our co-organizer Ravil. Ravil, you are welcome. Sergei Rogov is joining us. And Boris, Boris, you are welcome to make a presentation.
Alexander, we agreed that Alexander Shirov will start. Yes, we'll start, and I'll just pick up because we have some kind of a matching piece. Okay.
Great, great. Okay, no problem.
Yes, I need a demonstration of my screen.
You can do it. I've switched off.
No, it's closed for me.
Ravil, will you please
yeah.
let Alexander to demonstrate his screen? Alexander Shirov. Ravil. Равиль, where is Равиль?
Почему Равиль?
Александр Дмитриевич, вы, наверное, меня так называете?
Ой,
его Денис зовут.
Равиль. Ой, извиняюсь, да.
Денис
это...
Равильевич.
Да,
Да,
Денис
да.
Равильевич. Денис, извините, ради бога, да.
Угу.
Денис.
Что нужно сделать еще раз?
Нужно...
Откройте Александру Широву, да.
Да,
Широв.
хорошо, сейчас, секундочку.
Введи исключи.
За взятку.
Так, все.
И вы на звук.
Okay. One moment, please. Full screen and
Сейчас, секундочку, я отключу звук, а потом включу.
It's okay?
Full screen. Okay.
One moment, please. Okay, so.
Так, сейчас, секундочку.
Сан Саныч, микрофон.
Да, okay. Excuse me. The first slide about changing in our work in the field of analysis and forecasting Russian economy in pandemic period, because we change our methodology, and now you can see that we have three stages of pandemic development or recovery of economy, and the first one is lockdown. It's of course in this period, second quarter of 2020, our estimation in the field of recession depth and very important point of unacceptable economic damage, because in our current estimation, in Russian case, no more than 2.5 months lockdown could be without unacceptable economic damage. The next step is exit from the lockdown, and in this field, very interesting for us is situation on the labor market and situation in reopened industries. And now we estimated economic decrease in lockdown period about 12%, minus 12% of GDP in second quarter, and minus 5% of GDP in third quarter of this year. And in the last step, recovery of economy, of course, the main topic is analysis of efficiency government support in this period. But unfortunately, our estimation is negative dynamics in fourth quarter for this year. Now, we have statistic about the first months of pandemic in April, and you can see that we have some negative and some positive dynamics in main economic indicators. For example, pharmaceuticals industry grows year to year about 13.5%, food industry plus 3.7%, agriculture plus 3.1%, chemicals products 2.4%, and oil extraction, it's very strange in condition of OPEC deal 1% plus. But total industry decreased about 6%, metallurgy minus 7%, retail minus 23%, and automobile industry about 80% minus. What about our forecast for midterm prospect? You can see that our estimation of GDP in 2020 is minus 5.3%. Household consumption about 5.9%. Export minus 8%, import minus 12%, and investment minus 5.4%. And next 3 years in inertial scenario, we estimate economic dynamics as not very high recovery, because GDP dynamics will be on the 2018 level only in 2022. Household consumption in 2024, and fixed capital investment in 2025. Of course, it's a very inertial scenario for Russian economy. Firstly, in this year we will have negative balance of current account balance, and of course it's a challenge for our economy and for our economic policy. The negative factor is that midterm potential economic growth has been reduced in these conditions from 4.5% as we estimated this midterm potential growth to 3.5%. The decrease is about 1 percentage point. Now we estimate potential economic growth from final demand as 0.2 percentage point from net export, 2 percentage point from gross capital formation, 0.9 percentage point from household consumption, and 0.4 from government consumption. Total 3.5. From production, we estimate this midterm potential from economic inertia about 1.1 percentage point, modernization of machinery and equipment, investment sector of Russian economy 0.7, housing construction 0.5, export efficiency in raw materials and not raw materials about 0.3 percentage point, and infrastructure about 1 percentage point, 3.5. Of course, you can see that the situation in Russian economy has worsened for last 3-4 months, but the development targets for Russian economy have remained unchanged. Of course, we have to solve our problems with in this new situation. What the sources for increase of our midterm potential growth, because midterm potential growth is not a constant. It could be decrease or increase. Of course, in this year we have increase of potential growth of Russian economy, but we need in some measures for change this situation. From my point of view, the first idea is that general government spending in Russia. In this slide, you can see that right side, our public social spending. Our public social spending in the average level in development and developing countries with a high level of incomes, about 12% of GDP. But if you look at the left picture, you can see that our level of general government spending too low. We have general government spending only 33.8%, and of course we have to use this additional general government spending for recovery our economy for the last 2-3 years. Of course, we have some government sources for this. Next, very important point for Russian economy is import substitutions. You can see that we have now the potential of import substitution in government budget investments, very low, but very high in electro sector, electric power engineer sector, metallurgy, chemicals, oil extraction, of course, in services for oil industry, telecommunications, construction, and so on. Of course, we can use this potential for additional GDP growth in mid-term prospect. Next point is multipliers on GDP by different support measures in Russia. You can see that the level or these different measures is the results of multipliers of these different measures is very in big range. And for example, support for credits household consumption is 6.14 in current period, and export subsidies only 0.97. Very important that it's not multiplier, but multiplication effect of different support measures, because of course the credits instruments is very good, but current financial and economic conditions, Russian households and Russian companies not so good, and the demand for these credits will be not so big. And today was presented a national action plan for recovery Russian economy for next 2 years, this year and 2021. What is the key targets of this plan? No, in this slide you can see that non-commodity exports increased 5% in 2021. Real wages plus 2.5% in 2021. Retail growth 3%. Manufacturing and industries plus 3%, and investment 4.5%. And target for GDP in 2021 is 2.5%. Our estimations show that in these results for investment, manufacturing, real wages, retail, and so on, we will have more economic growth than 2.5%. Our estimation in these indicators, in these conditional indicators, show that it's about 3% in next year. But what is key measures and key effects from this national plan? First of all, there are 6 main directions of government spending. And first one, social support. Next one, employment. Third one, investment projects, major investment projects in railways, in auto roads, and so on. Support for import substitution, support of Russian regions, and sectoral measures. You can see that the total funds for these measures is big, because for example, social support, it's 700 billion rubles for 2 years. Investment projects about 2.1 billions rubles in 2 years too, and employment about 50, import substitution about 1 trillion rubles. But all these measures go to the economy with 3 flaws. The first one, budget investment. The second one, government goods, and the third one, support of household incomes. From this side, the total additional GDP growth in 2020 is about 2.7 trillion ruble, and 2021 2.5 trillion ruble. From sector side, construction, transportation, health, education, and so on, the total sum in 2020 is 422 billions ruble, and 2021 470 rubles. And now, finally, additional GDP growth in 2020 we estimated as 3.1% of GDP, and in 2021 plus 2.6% of GDP. It means that in base scenario for 2020, Russian economy dropped down about 7.5%, and now with this plan about 5%. And next year we estimated average we estimated GDP growth about 3%. From my point of view, the last figures will be it's impossible because we have very low base in this year, and if this funding will be done, that our economy will have about 3% next year. But the problem is the condition of economic policy in 2022 and the future. And of course, the main risk is if we come back to the policy of macroeconomic stabilization. In this case, unfortunately, our economy could be create new stagnation, and of course, our mid-term and long-term targets of economic development could not arrive. Okay. Yes, the next slides is for Boris Nikolaevich Porfiriev, and I give the floor to Professor Porfiriev.
Денис, включите, пожалуйста, Борису Николаевичу микрофон.
Oh, no, I believe I'm here. Okay. Okay, I'm here. Okay, thank you. Okay, but let me. So should I proceed, or we should go on with the questions? What is the schedule, Alexandrovich?
The schedule?
Yeah, should I proceed, or we should go on with these questions to Alexander? What's the plan?
Well, I propose that you proceed, and then we'll have both questions and comments. Yes.
Oh, okay. Let me then.
Reminded.
Okay, then let me ask for the favor to show my screen. If Denise don't mind, please give me the chance to activate my screen. Okay.
No, you can do it.
I can do it. Okay, thank you. Just a second. Let me. Oh no, I need. See. Okay. Can you see them? No. Do you see the screen? No.
We see the screen, but
like a black rectangle. Right?
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me do it another way. Okay. Let me try again.
На самом деле, кто сейчас хочет включиться в дискуссию, могут включать себе микрофон.
Okay. Something is going wrong with my. Okay. What about now?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet.
It's a gray rectangle.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Боря, а вы открыли у себя на экране соответствующую презентацию?
Yes. Okay. Oh, some problems with the Zoom, I believe. Okay. No.
Oh, here it is.
Okay. And anyway, so you have good. No picture, yeah?
Oh, there is a picture.
There is. You got it.
Yeah. You
Вам
got
нужно
it?
запустить показ слайдов.
Okay. Now I'll do it. Okay, I think so. Is it fine? No?
Yes.
It's okay.
It's okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me start that with the citation from the General Secretary of United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Recently, he revealed his report on the SDG progress. It was, I believe, a couple of weeks from now. He said that what began as a health crisis quickly turned to be the worst human and economic crisis in our lifetimes. And he called for response worth, I believe, some 10% of the global GDP. So we know the numbers of the economic drop. On the other hand, many people believe that there was at least one good sign of this crisis. It was the improvement of environmental quality. And if we turn to these pictures, well, I try to demonstrate, we'll see that really some signs of improvement are here. So first, if we see this picture on this pandemic Olympic of the Chinese economy, we see that it was a 4-year minimum of energy production of the coal energy power station, 5-year minimum of steel production, and in the key industrial sectors, there was a shrinkage between 15 to 40%. And air flights number plummeted to 70%. And of course, this impact transferred into the less quantities of emissions extended to the air in China. And here are the pictures. We see that immediately after the Chinese New Year festivities, the average year of air pollution dropped to 75% in contrast to the same dates in 2019. And the respective indicator of the nitrogen dioxide exceeded 30%. And carbon dioxide, also these GHG emissions went down by 100 million tons, making up to almost 6% of the global emissions produced within the same time frame in the air area. So the same picture showing that the nitrogen dioxide air pollution in the east of the United States also dropped considerably. And the next picture illustrating France and western parts of Germany. well, I believe it's quite conceiving this picture. Well, you will see it's real shrinkage of the concentrations of this toxic and at the same time greenhouse gas as the nitrogen dioxide in Spain and then in Italy. So and finally to finish with this line of these pictures, this change of the suspended particles of particulate matter, of suspended particles of a particulate matter 2.5, which is the carcinogenic, very active carcinogenic particles, and the concentrations of the air of these in the 10 world capitals during the pandemic quarantine dropped, except you see the Rome situation. It was quite curious, but in Rome, the concentration of this particulate matter went up. And of course, this improvement in air quality transferred into the betterment conditions for breathing, and many people liked it, of course. However, being very glamorous with this improvement, we can't but ask ourselves two important questions. How long will it stay with us, this environmental holiday? And the number two, what's the price? Was this improvement really worth of it, or wasn't the price too high for this? As far as the extension of this improvement, we see that from our previous experience in this financial crisis in 2008-2009, we see there was a drop of GDP almost by 2%, and at the same time was a drop of almost 1% of GHG emissions, but it lasted only for 1 year. In the coming 6 or 7 years, the amount of the emissions increased by 6 times, and it 7 times, and it reached 12% of the all increase, starting from 2010 up to 2016. As far as the price of this improvement is concerned, I believe we can't buy it. Because this slowdown of the economy with some could be 3 to 4% of the GDP, it was escorted by the decreasing living level and quality of life, and of course it can be transferred into the worsening of the conditions, or health conditions as well. So I mean that if we believe that is the recipe to improve the environmental situation by slowing down the economy, we'll see that the medicine in this sense will be even much worse than the disease itself. And if we again come back to the experience of the 1990s, we'll see that it was a deep recession, it was a hard economic crisis in Russia. And it was escorted, of course, by the heavy drop of all kind of emissions, both toxic emissions, hazardous emissions, and GHG, the greenhouse gases emissions as well. But if we turn not to absolute numbers, but to specific emissions, we would see that it was an increase by, say, 12 to 13%. So again, it means that we don't have, and we didn't have, and we don't have any real improvement. And finally, the final reservation on this is that this improvement is somewhat controversial, because if we come back to this GHG emissions, we'll see that the reduction of emissions of aerosols means that we also provide conditions for increasing heating of the earth. because according to the models, if we have, for instance, the concentration of aerosol equal to 0, then we'll have an additional heating of the Earth by 1%. Sorry, one centigrade degree. And the second point is that it's also a chain reaction dealing with this with the circumstances. We know that the current crisis involves not only the COVID pandemics, but also the drop of the oil prices. And this, of course, makes these hydrocarbons, oil and gas, much more competitive with renewables. And this means some kind of risks in terms of, again, emissions as such. On the top of this, it means that the plastics produced from oil also become cheaper, and these plastics is involved in using these masks, medical masks, and other medical equipment, and we have this increasing number of plastic wastes, which is also a problem, an increasing problem. So all in all, it's quite a complex implications from the COVID pandemics, and we can't say that we have a real win-win game. In about improvement, we should talk with really deep caution and with many reservations. But if we come back to the more fundamental questions about the fundamental question of a green economy, on even more to the sustainable development, from my perspective, I believe that pandemics doesn't change anything from this fundamental viewpoint. Because if we come back to the 2015 decisions of both UN sessions in Addis Ababa and on the global agenda, I mean this sustainable development goals, and the December conference in Paris concerning climate change. So we see that all these strategic goals are still in the pipe. So we can't say that we have come some kind of depreciation of these strategic development goals in the light of the ongoing pandemics. Moreover, I believe that it even increased this importance of that. And we should also believe that as far as green economy is concerned, in terms of the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program concept, green economy is an economic activity which leads to the increasing well-being of the people and strengthening of social equity, while also providing for betterment of the government of the environment and nature. So I mean that this definition means that green economy doesn't only involve only ecological or environmental improvement. Much more important, at least no less important, even much more important, is the strengthening of the well-being of the people. And pandemics in no way, of course, will change this situation. Moreover, pandemics prove that the priority should be provided to the so-called adaptation or adaptive strategy or adaptation measures. The first package of this adaptation involves the modernization of the structure of the economy and the technological modernization. I believe that Alexander Shurov in his early presentation, in this or that way, he proved that the both kind of modernization, structural modernization and technological modernizations are the keystone of the recovery of our economy and then switching it to the sustainable development. The same is true for the whole world economy. So this is the only way to resolve the environmental problems and climatic change problems, to involve and put the accent on these two modernization streams. The calculations and modeling forecasting, which Alexander with his team just finished recently in our institute, they vividly demonstrated that the most effective and efficient measures in reducing environmental degradation in terms of the hazardous emissions as well as GHG emissions were the deep restructuring of our economy and structure of our economy and technological improvement. These two factors provided over 90% of the compensation of the increase of the GHG emissions if the basic scenario, I mean the initial scenario, was in place. And also the COVID pandemics revealed the great potential of the information and communication technologies in very many aspects. And this is really important in this technological modernization, not only in the area of communication, but of course in the economy, on the whole economy, using this intersectional intertwisting and well, interchange. As far as the specific areas are concerned, and if we turn, for instance, to energy power sector, many people were very optimistic and still are, by the way, in developing clean energy, as they say. But the emphasis, if we turn to the most popular strategies as far as the energy development is concerned, this is the emphasis on the renewables as a key. And in this sense, we should believe that I believe that we should be very specific. What is clean energy, for instance, in Europe, is not the same as the clean energy in Russia, because well, say if we turn to our energy balance, we would see that it involves some 30% of the low carbon sources, mainly hydropower stations, and atomic power stations, nuclear power stations, and renewables, some 1%. It all in all makes 37% of the input of energy, electricity, sorry, into our production. And some 50% amounts to or makes up that provided by gas. And if we compare that with Europe, which is, say, for instance, in Germany, we know that over 30%, some 37% is from electricity is provided by renewables, but we shouldn't oversee that it also involves a substantial share of coal contribution into this. And all in all, in Europe, it's some 22%. And in the United States, it's over 20%, while in Russia, we have some from 13 to 14% of coal contribution to energy production. So I mean that it's a different composition of sources, but it leads to the overall same effect of lowering the load, the burden on environment and human health. So this should be borne in mind when we are talking about the specific strategies of the countries in terms of this modernization. And in Russia, of course, the main source of modernization and efficiency of the economy is our investments into energy efficiency. We should see in this picture that it's a big untapped opportunity, Russia, making up some 50% in comparison with our other big economies. And we should, of course, tap on this and use it as a driver for our modernization. So trying to sum up somewhat, I would again reiterate that I don't see that this pandemics, this coronavirus pandemics, it involves some fundamental changes into the conceptual into the concept of the strategy of economic development. I don't see that we should do something different that was envisaged in the strategy with these sustainable development goals, with Paris Agreement, or if we switch to our country, what was assumed to do with to cope with the stagnation of economy and to instigate our rates of economic growth and of course structural and technological changes, which is a must of real big reforms in Russia, leaving alone, of course, institutional changes as well. And in this sense, I believe two factors are important. Number one is that the rate of or the speed of changing the situation with the coronavirus and getting out of this, the recovery, starting the recovery, real recovery of economy and the whole socio-economic fabrics of our country. And as you see from this picture with the composition of different sources, there's a hoping for the V-shaped recovery. Most of the pundits agree that this will be a real V-shaped recovery, and they believe there will be no second wave of pandemics, of course, in the nearest future. And you see the respective numbers for Russia, which is approaches to some 5%, and Alexander just assumed that it well, our forecast is quite close to these numbers. And of course, so it's important how much money and funds will be invested in this. And currently, we see that the all in all G20 economies stimulus package approaches $10 trillion, which makes up some 11% of the global GDP. We know that our numbers are quite modest in this comparison, and I believe that the numbers which were or have been earmarked today for this plan for recovery of our economy, which was some, if I'm not mistaken, 5 trillion rubles. I believe this could be considered as a low barrier for this. And in strategic perspective, we should see what kind of this green stimulus packages will be and how much they will be, will be a share of all kind of stimulus packages. I mean, green stimulus packages as a part of the whole packages. If we turn back to the previous experience of the financial crisis and economic crisis some 12 years from now, and you see these diagrams of the packages and the share of green packages in this stimulus, we'll see that the numbers are quite impressive. All in all, I believe it's some can be 15% all in all from the all green stimulus package, from the whole stimulus package. Well, it means that it was could be 1.4% of the global GDP invested in the green stimulus package in this last crisis. And we know that it helped, but not much. Could be only China gained from this economic from this green stimulus for economic recovery, and they see that the both the absolute numbers and the the share of green component of still of this green green component of the stimulus package, which approaches some to 40%, was really a good driver for these changes. Not for many European countries. And now the European countries, they want to reconsider this and they want to increase it considerably. And as well, to the best of my knowledge, the overall numbers that are assumed for this situation would increase to 3% of the global GDP to these green stimulus packages. And European countries, European governments assume that this will propel their recovery and the sustainable growth in the nearest future, basing mainly on these packages and measures inserted into what they call the new Green Deal. At least the government earmarked that the Green Deal should be the kind of the core of this economic recovery. I don't know. These are declarations. I know what would actually follow up, but well, the intentions are serious. But coming back to Russia, I believe that we, of course, should also shouldn't overlook this opportunity and involve also these green stimulus measures into the overall packages to recover our economy, because many green so-called green technologies are research-intensive technologies. They are really high technologies, and that means that we also invest into the technological modernization of the in all accordance with this modern requirement. And I hope that we'll not overlook this opportunity, because crisis is a real too valuable time to oversee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Boris. So now we can put questions and make comments. Who would like to be the first speaker?
Everybody can now put on
yes,
the microphone.
Turn on the microphones for everybody. Denis.
Everybody can turn on
oh yes, you can
own microphone.
Your microphones yourselves. Please do it. And
Jacques.
Yes.
Yes, Jacques, you are welcome.
Yes, thank you. It's a question for Alexander. Alexander, I understand that when you made your computations for the multiplier, you had to make a distinction between different groups of households. Nevertheless, I am a bit surprised to see so much a difference between, as you say, the support for population loans and the support for household incomes, because in the end, it amount to exactly the same thing. So could you explain us how you arrived to this computation?
Alexander, you are welcome. You have to switch on.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Okay. In this slide, you can see our estimation for different multipliers for different measures. For example, the first one is support of household credits. The second one is household demand for Russian products, not for import. Yeah, it's very important. And last one is a support of household income. Of course, if you have more money, you go to the supermarket, and there are Russian goods and import goods and so on. Of course, the multiplier in this case is lower than the first one, previous one. And for credits multiplier is higher in the reason of leverage, because government pay subsidies some share of rates, and the money go from the households with high incomes, first of all. And if you look at these measures in this slide, the first one is social support. It's first of all anti-poverty measures. It's money for family with children and so on. But the second one, employment support, is money for people without job. They stay without job in this crisis. So it's my answer about differences in effects from different measures for households.
Yes, well, I was thinking at first that the support for the population loans, you know, that you quoted first, and with the very high multiplier of GDP, was targeting not just the richest part of the population, but at least some very wealthy households. And because of this household could have a propensity to consume probably higher than other. Have you made some computation on the propensity of saving and the propensity to consume according to different groups of the population?
Yes, that's sure. I think that this measure for support of loans is only for people who work in budget system. It's government, education, health, and people with high level of income. Yes, only for these groups of population, because in previous years the loans grows rapidly in different kind of population, but now the potential of loan growth for households is not so big from my point of view, and very high multiplier, but unfortunately we have not very big macroeconomic effect from this point.
Thank you. Please, colleagues, you are welcome to make comments and put questions.
Alexander, I have one question. Matias Novak here from University of Primorska.
Yes, you are welcome, Matias.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. I would like to express my impressions about both presentations. First of all, perhaps I have questions actually for both, but I would like to start with the question for Alexander Shiro. If I understood correctly, the presentation, the speech, Mr. Shiro, you have, it's an action plan, and if I understand it correctly, it has, you know, it's based on fiscal policy approach, correct? So it's actually all of the actions are supported by the national budget somehow, yeah?
Yes.
What about, you know, why, because you are speaking about the national plan, and, you know, why actually this plan doesn't include more ambitious approach from the monetary policy or from the monetary authorities, as the Central Bank of Russia, for instance, is you can speed up the, I don't know, investments with the interest policy, with the monetary, with the money supply policy. So you are based, the plan, the national plan is based more or less on the fiscal policy and somehow the monetary policy is excluded. Perhaps what's the reason for this, or is this a second part? I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you for this question. First of all, its national plan goes from government.
Yeah.
And of course, the government work with budget, and the budget measures in this plan is the first on the first plan. Of course, there are a lot of words about economic policy, target of economic development, business environment, and so on. But finally, we have one sum in total from this plan. It's about 2.6 trillion rubles in 2020, and the same sum in next year. Of course, our central bank have some ideas about macroeconomic policy. For example, very important point is budgeting, because budget deficit in this year and in 2021 will be more than is a restriction of budget rule. And of course, Russian government have to change something in budget rule next year. But if we change budget rule, we change situation in our exchange rate with financial market, because in previous period budget rule restrict ruble recovery. It's very important for our competition in domestic market with import. But now this situation will be changed, and it's a macroeconomic problem, because it's restriction from different side of economic policy. I'm not sure what will be our monetary policy, because the main risk I have said that will be come back to the policy of macroeconomic stabilization. It's very, very important risk for mid-term economic dynamics in our country.
So if I understand you correctly, actually there is no room, because of the macroeconomic stability, that from your point of view, that monetary policy will be more active, but needs to be strictly separated from the government.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, colleagues, you are welcome to put questions. And please, Alexander, may I also ask you that V-shape recovery, it's not so steep in Russia as in other countries. What is the reason for this? Some policy, some specific features of our economic policy, or some restraints on the resource side of the economy. Why is it so?
Microphone, Mike. Microphone.
Please
Mike.
switch on your microphone.
Excuse me. The problem on the side of macroeconomic policy, I'm not sure that our government ready for, not only government, but the central bank too, ready for active economic policy. Policy with more budgets stimulus and with very aggressive monetary policy too. And of course, we have reserves. We have funds for economic growth in the condition of not very good situation on commodity markets. But I think if we spend in this year and next year about 5-6% of GDP, the reason for government will be if we have not reserves, we have not reason for active economic policy. It's my point. I think that risk is very high, but of course we have some opportunities in this crisis. First of all, if you look at the national plan, you can see changes in money for national projects. You can see that 2 trillion US ruble will be
Russian ruble
go to the infrastructure projects for 2 years. It changes something in previous plans of these investments. Yes, it could be additional economic growth, but it's not changes in economic policy. It's only changes in budget financing of national projects. We need more changes.
And I'm sorry, and your estimate of 3.4 or 5% growth of GDP next year refers to potential growth or to the growth envisaged by, with the measures envisaged by the government?
Yeah. Of course, if we have 5 or 6 percent GDP decrease in this year, the growth rates about 3% next year is only recovery, but not full recovery, but it's a partly recovery of our economy. And from side of household consumption and investment activity, this recovery will be only in 2024, 2025. It's very long recovery for our economy. We have for last 10 years average growth rates about 0.8%. It's too low because we need more intensive economic dynamic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please, colleagues, you are welcome to make comments or put questions. And Mikhail, you are welcome. Mikhail.
Yes, thank you. I want to react on Matyash's question. I think it corresponds also with my previous report and with the answer of Alexander. Thank you, Matyash. It seems for me that now the Central Bank of Russia is very cautious. For that reason, which Alexander had already mentioned, I mean the reason of macroeconomic stabilization. Although in rhetorics, they wrote about there will be the disinflation pressure from the containing aggregate demand. But of course, if we think about some recovery, of course, there will be rising aggregate demand and there will be upward pressure. The other part is the exchange rate, which was also mentioned by Alexander in his answer. But I think for me, it is the crucial question which we had discussed a lot 2 weeks ago, I think the capital controls. Because without capital controls, of course, there will be a pressure on exchange rate of the ruble in case of this monetary stimulus. But anyway, for me, it seems that now the interest rate policy of Central Bank of Russia is very cautious because there is still a room for some rate cut, of course, taking into account the current inflation. And of course, there's a room for more stimulus in monetary terms. But anyway, there are some examples of interaction. For example, in programs of small and medium enterprises support, when there are special programs of monetary stimulus, which is supported by fiscal stimulus, I mean, the subsidizing interest rate to almost zero for those small and medium enterprises for their payroll of wages. So this is the example of interaction of monetary and fiscal policy. This is my remark. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have just one small additional question to yeah, but so if I understand, I don't know, I'm not currently on the position to understand the macroeconomic situation in Russia. But if I understand you, Mikhail, correctly, currently you have inflation pressures in a country, correct?
No, it's not very small. There was a little bit uprise trend in inflation, a little after the depreciation of exchange rate in March. This was reflected in April, but now it's 3% inflation. It is a very low level for Russian economy. Now we haven't had such an inflation pressure. It could be, and I think that is the main reason why the central bank is so cautious, despite his rhetorics.
But we have we have demand restrictions, and first of all, and the second one is that ruble devaluation in March, April was not so big, and finally import pressure for inflation is too low, and finally. It's possible we will have zero real interest rate in the end this year, or maybe in first half of 2021. It's possible because.
But now it's positive.
Yeah. Yes.
That is better.
Yeah. Because the situation is that from the monetary policy in this period of lockdown and exit from this lockdown in this situation is monetary policy is neutral, because all companies, all financial and economic conditions, every companies in Russia is very bad, and of course the new credits, it's credits with government support only.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And what about the environment? What we don't put questions to Boris Porfiry.
It's not so important given the social problems.
Alexander, I might be off your screen. This is Jan.
Yes.
I would be interested to ask Boris. I was interested in your green lining. Normally we say silver lining, but you gave us green lining of the Corona crisis, and you gave us various hopes that this is an opportunity to move things, to have a greening of the recovery. I'm wondering what you think are the conditions that are necessary to realize this opportunity. Because I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm thinking many people were speaking in the time of the financial crisis, 12, 13 years ago, that this was an opportunity for major reform. But once the recovery got going, everyone sort of forgot about that and went back to normal.
Dank u wel, Jan, for your question. It's real important, your reservation, because many times we have crises, we also have big plans how we should recover, and we try to seek for this, what you say, green lining or silver lining, whatever. Okay, trying to find any magical bullet. But as soon as the recovery starts, then everybody forgets, because we all are drowned in these current problems, current issues, trying to cope with them in this or that way, and then we suddenly see that the next crisis is approaching. Given your your question, coming back to your question, I assume that most hopes are they rests on the major strategies some countries perceive as really the cornerstone of their future development. I mean, first of all, as far as Europe is concerned, you know, I believe better than I do this Green New Deal. Of course, I don't believe that it will be 100% implemented, because there are a lot of risks involved in the implementation of the strategy. But what I do believe that this emphasis, this green emphasis of the recovery in Europe will stick to this Green New Deal, using it probably not more as a problem, but as a concept, as a kind of a, I don't know what kind of, some kind of ideology in quotation marks. Okay, as our countries, as far as our country is concerned, and could be many other, I believe that I don't think that this green slogan, this green light, will be the somehow the leading star of our changes. I don't think so. I believe what we really need this technological modernization, because technological obsolescence is at the core of low rates of economic growth and structural changes. But the point is that it could be coincidence, but when we are talking about the best available technologies, we have a special law, by the way, which stimulate using this best available technologies. These are not only more efficient in terms of output, in terms of resource saving, but they also involves less environmental impact. In this sense, they are green. And if we all in all consider all these aspects, then it turns out that the green component is quite influential, so to speak. I mean, it's quite conspicuous. And I don't see, again, this is the green light, which will I don't know, will be the leading arrow of our development in Russia. But I do believe that these will be considerations important for inserting changes in our economic strategy. And in this sense, I believe that pandemics is it's a kind of controversy, but it's you know, every crisis involves both negative and positive sides. So this is a kind of a window of opportunity, because what pandemics really mean, it means that we should invest more in human health in a very broad terms, not only in just medical in medical realms, but also in much more in many more aspects, including environmental ones. And I believe this will be a guide not only for Europe, but for Russia, for the United States, for every country. This is the comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Yes, colleagues, you are welcome to put questions and make comments.
Можно, Alexandrovich?
Sure, конечно.
Thank you. Do you know, I'm rather skeptic about the greening of world economy. My reasons are not economic, but political ones. I think that situation has changed rather drastically, and has changed for worse. Because during last decade, we had some kind of crisis of globalization. Now it's going to a new step, more dangerous one. It is the crisis of global world, as we know it during 3 last decades. I think it will worsen condition for, not first of all, for restoration of world economy, and especially for its greening prospect in future. Because now, as I see it, we have a real threat of decoupling of world economy, decoupling between so-called American sphere of influence and the Chinese one. And then you said about technology, about the possibility, Boris, which technology gives to all of us to change rather drastically the world economy, to make it much more green responsive. But I doubt it, because really now we have not a real technological war between United States and between China. And of course, I'm sure it will have huge negative impact, not only on both these two leading economic countries, but on the world economy as a whole. And I think you, I mean economists, have to take in your mind, in your reasoning, this kind of political consideration, which policy and politics now, of course, has preponderance versus economy. Now it's become unclear who is a real patron on the world scene. For people who decide in Washington, in Beijing, this is a more important question than any economic consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Sergei Rogov, you are welcome.
Okay, I will respond later. Okay.
Maybe, Boris, I have a question to Alexander concerning, I think, slide number 3 or number 4, when he represented the governmental expenditures and social expenditures, public social expenditures. So maybe, Boris, you respond to the question while Alexander will find that slide. Okay?
Alexander is very fast, so I don't think I have a chance.
I have a rather narrow view of the problems we are talking about. My preoccupation, as you may know, is with the priorities of the governmental expenditures. And on this slide, I see at the left general government spending, and that is, I think, the correct representation of the situation. And I think a rather confusing right part of the picture, public social spending. Because, well, apparently it's a very narrow definition of the public social spending. I look at the table 6.10 point at the OECD publication Social Expenditure 2019. The numbers there are much higher. The average expenditure by the OECD countries is more than 20%, and that's the number one is France with more than 30%. At this picture, I cannot find France. Just a second.
From above, from the top.
Only 18%.
Number 3.
Yeah, number 3. While it is in fact number 1 with more than 30%. And I think that maybe your data excludes very major items from the public social expenditures as they defined by the OECD statistics, in particular the public health expenditures. Because this is, together with the social protection, one of the major components of the public social expenditures. And I think this is a very important point because, well, At your diagram, at your picture, Russia is somewhere in the middle. It is not. If we take internationally accepted definition of the public social spending, and that is, I think, something which have to be clarified because, well, apparently, as a result of the coronavirus crisis, the general government expenditures jumped, but very much definitely is going to be spent on health. And when the crisis is over, if it is over, I think, well, it's very difficult to expect that those expenditures will begin to shrink. I think the public, the society, will put enormous pressure on the government to maintain a rather high level of expenditures for social protection, since the unemployment jumped tremendously, and on health. And another consequence of this situation will be the huge growth in public debt, in the central government debt in countries like the United States and France. It will exceed very much 100%. And of course, we know how big is the public debt in Japan, in Italy, and some other countries. And the final point which I want to mention is that probably the rapid growth of military expenditures, which have been taken place in the last several years, will end. Already there are some indications that even China will have lower growth in defense expenditures. And in some countries, these expenditures may reduce. And that also has an impact on our country, where the percentage of the governmental public social spending is much smaller than in the most of the OECD countries. And defense expenditures are higher. And so, well, please clarify why you use the, what I call public social spending, a narrow definition. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I simply does not understand exactly what you meant by using the narrow definition.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Now we have a queue. Who is going to answer his question first, Boris or Alexander? Boris, well, probably you. Yes.
Well, it's no problem. If the floor is mine, is no problem. Okay. Well, Victor Boris, thank you very much indeed for your well, fundamental and provocative question at the same time. Well, about your skeptical perception of this. Well, on the one hand, I share your skeptical sentiment on this. Yeah, in part, these political considerations. Well, first, they are really number one at the point. The influence on economic policy and the economic scenes everywhere. And of course, this impact on this diverts some funds, of course, on what could be called green recovery or green restructuring of the economy, and so on and so forth. But again, let me emphasize that I'm not talking about the, so to speak, really some ecological perspective of this. What I mean is about the greening of the economy is more could be labeled as eco-social transformation, because again, human interests and social interests and human health is at the core of everything, which pandemics reveal with the quite convincing, I believe, strength. And we know that everybody, whatever the policy, should invest more in human health. We know about this crisis, medical and healthcare crisis in the United States. We saw these problems in Europe. So, and as again, when we talk about that, we should invest more make more human investments. This for this or that reason involves that you should be more environmentally concerned, concerning human ecology more than could be natural environment, and this is very important. Then you mentioned that there is a trade war between the United States and China. Yeah, it's true, and also influence could be on these investments. But on the other hand, it also stipulates China invest more in its own economy to make more emphasis on their internal market, and it also involves the investments in ecological equipment, in air conditioning, in, by the way, higher speed trains also are considered as a green technology. So all in all, China will follow, I believe, more import substitution strategy. In this sense, in terms of this trade war with Russia, with the United States, but in any way, it will invest more in this area. And the reason is quite obvious. You know, for environmental reasons, China lose every year almost 1 million lives. So only due to this poor quality of air. So it's no other way. It's no other way. 4 million males in China have problems with reproduction function. So it's due to environmental conditions. So there's no other way but to invest. And so I believe, as far as, again, turning to the different perspective, or again, of China, using this as a case, China is #1 in investments in wind energy in Europe. So I don't think they will turn their back to Europe, and the Europeans are interested in that. Although they're competitors at the same time, but in any way, there's a good cooperation between, say, Vestas and China. So, so in this or that way, this will proceed. But again, let me stress it once more. I don't think there will be a greening in terms of ecological happiness. It will be more eco-social transformation, concerned mainly with the interests of human environment and human health. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. So now the turn is of Alexander. Yes, you are welcome, Alexander.
Yes, the main idea of this slide is that our level of public social spending is normal for our level of GDP. Of course, we use OECD data and make some efforts for compare this data for Russian budget statistics, because, for example, in this data, not transfers in natural form. And if our public social spending is on the level of our GDP, but general spending is not at the level of our economic development, because in this period of macroeconomic stabilization or financial stabilization, our government spending were on the very low level. and we have potential about 10% of GDP increase for increase of this spending. Of course, it's a question for economic policy and for estimation, forecasting. We need or not this higher level of general spending, but it is potential of our economic growth. It's a potential for our economic policy.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, colleagues, dear colleagues, you are welcome to put questions, more questions, and make more comments.
Sergey Mikhailovich wants to.
Sergey Mikhailovich? Oh, yes, please do. Sergey, please.
I must confess that I'm surprised that professional economists, and I'm not an economist, I'm in different business, but professional economists are paying so little interest to the structure of the governmental expenditures. And what Alexander said is correct, that we don't spend enough of the GDP through the general government spending. But let me compare our situation with the American situation, with the United States. As your diagram, Alexander, correctly demonstrates, Russia and the United States spend almost approximately the same percentage of the GDP through the government. Russia about 33%, the United States 38%, and that's much less than most of the other member states of the OECD. But again, the United States spends more than 20% of the GDP on public social spending. Not what in this in your diagram, when it's only 8.8, but more than 20%. Only on health, the United States spends about 10% of the GDP. The United States government spends on health about 10% of the GDP, plus private expenditures 7%. So altogether, it's about 17%. Of course, well, the present coronavirus crisis demonstrated that despite those huge expenditures, and the United States spends on health twice as much, at least twice as much as any other country, and 10 times more than Russia. So those expenditures don't ensure that the health system is effective. American health system demonstrated almost a complete collapse during this crisis. But nevertheless, for us, this analysis of the priorities of the governmental expenditures is very important. And that is also related to what I consider almost a false preoccupation which still dominates in our country about the negative impact of the governmental debt. Not only the developed countries accumulated much higher governmental debt than Russia, but also developing countries. And the oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia or natural gas like Kuwait, they also have much higher level of governmental debt. And that's related to the situation when in our country, for many years, the slogan of the need to avoid deficit is used to keep general governmental expenditures rather low, and in particular, public social expenditures very low. And until we challenge this mythology and demonstrate that this is simply incorrect, and we will see in the near future how the public debt will grow in different countries all over the world, our preoccupation results in a situation when socially we are falling more and more behind the developed countries. And without a much more active governmental role, we won't be able to change this situation. I apologize for the interfering, but really I'm impressed by the presentation which was made today. But I appeal to the professional economists, pay attention to this situation, because, well, we cannot live surrounded by mythology concerning governmental deficit and the governmental public debt.
Thank you very much, Sergey, not for your interference, but for your comment. Yes, it's very interesting and important what you said. Yes, you are welcome to go on. We are all welcome to go on with the discussion. If there are questions and more comments, please do, or answers. You know, I've just from the beginning of the transformation process in our country, I was quite puzzled by the strive of our government to diminish expenditures much less than the respective countries, other respective countries in the world. And I do agree with Sergey that, you know, it is now like a tradition here to say, as it could not be contested, that this is our great advantage, that we practically only in several years have had a deficit of our budget, and that we have such a small national debt. Well, in a sense, now, as far as I understand the idea of Sergey, what he is saying is that our small national debt now really provides, is a potential for massive borrowing by the country and for expenditure. So from this point of view, this is an advantage, but nobody, it seems that nobody wants to use it, as well as nobody wants to use the reserves which have been created just for these difficult times. You know, now we are in these difficult times, and the government seems to be very conservative about using these reserves. I am not saying that it would be necessary just to use all of them or a major part of them just at once. Of course, the idea of echelonating, so to say, this expenditure seems quite attractive to me, but I'm not quite sure that they are going to do this. And saying nothing about the monetary policy, which has already been discussed today. It's quite separate in our country, you know, really, and it's very strange. And the government practically has accepted that the central bank resolves its own problems and practically has nothing to do with the state of the economy, because they continue saying the same thing, that when you have low inflation, you are going to have investments. But you have low inflation because of high interest rates, and no normal investment process is possible at this investment rates and so on. And probably in the long run, in 20 years, probably it changes, but should we wait so long?
May I add a couple of words to this, okay?
Yes, sure.
I believe this is a very interesting question, and I believe that the answer is in the psychology. I believe that our government follows what the strategy which is called the risk aversion strategy, and it also stems from what is called the responsibility and accountability of the government. So the government don't want to be accountable. They don't want to be responsible. They feel that every step that involves any kind of investment, both resources and time, with everything, it involves risk, of course. And but you should buy this risk. You should do this because no other way. But if you do this, you should take the responsibility on your shoulders. And these guys, I believe, they simply don't want to be the responsible, and they use this risk aversion because it's quite cautious for them. I believe that there's the same reason which Anton mentions about this, or somebody else, about this central bank being very cautious about making decisive steps. People try to be around, but not to make decisive steps. And I think this is the more psychological than other reason for this kind of political and economical behavior. That's at least my feeling.
You found a very interesting expression, Boris. I would say not only psychological, but ideological as well.
Could be, yeah, maybe.
Yes. So please, you are welcome.
Alexandrovich.
Yes. Victor Vaishku-Aldin, yes.
Do you know, I agree. I agree with academician Porfiriev, because I would like to remind to all that it is not practice which was very widely used during 19th century. It is a philosophy of cheap state. First of all, cheap from the people who are governing this state. Yes, I agree that our government does not feel enough pressure from below to change this state of mind and this kind of policy, but I'm absolutely sure it is very, very short-sighted politics. And we, I mean, as society, as country, as state, we will have to pay a huge price for it. Thanks.
Thank you. So, would anybody like to make comments or put questions?
Academician Rogov, I think.
Oh, yes, Sergey, please. Yes. Yes, please.
Да, можно?
Антон.
Ага, спасибо. У меня был вопрос следующий.
Switch to English, please.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I had a question for Alexander, maybe. In the current plan of saving our economy from this poor situation, the amount of money scheduled for import substitution is rather low. But the scale of this problem seems much higher, following the opinions of businessmen and of people who participate in different opinion polls or conferences right now. We see from everywhere that many people say, please do something to defend us from the Chinese flow of goods. Please do something to provide for local parts, raw materials, plastics. Well, we would like to produce from something local. So that needs some kind of industrial policy. And the program for industrial policy does not really coincide with the current national plan. The current plan is more about infrastructures and social policy. Industrial policy could be a different plan. So how large could it be in our current system of public management? And how important for GDP could it be? Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. If you look at this part of national plan about import substitution, you can see that there are not absolutely policy for import substitution or restriction for import. First of all, it's a measure in the field of investment in machinery and equipment, high-tech industries, for example, microelectronics companies and so on, and for example, defense industry too. And I think it's very, very important and good. But if we speak about simple kinds of import, of course, we have very strong depend on China and Southeast, in other Southeast countries. And of course, it's a problem because we have not very good producing chains and value added chains, and of course it's minus for our economy, for our GDP. But this version of plan, from my point of view, is useful for our mid and long term targets for our industry development.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are nearing to the end of the seminar. So if somebody would like to say something, you are welcome. I don't see everybody at once.
Sergei Dmitrievich had his
Sergei Dmitrievich, yes, Sergei Dmitrievich, you are welcome.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask my question at the end, but I must leave this very interesting seminar. I have not specific, not concrete, but maybe existential question to Alexander Shirov. Alexander, you are excellent specialist and deputy director of the Main Institute Forecasting of Russia. Therefore, your opinion is important to us. Do you personally think that the parameter indicated in the government plan achievable? Is it possible to implement this plan? Do you believe in that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very difficult question. For example, last 2 days, I and my colleagues work with this paper, and finally, this morning we have total sum of these measures, and it's about 2.6 trillion rubles in this year and 2.4 in next year. But our Prime Minister, Mr. Mishustin, today in the meeting with President Putin, announced a sum in 5 trillion US dollar rubles for it's more than our yes, but it's what is strange. strange is that a lot of measures with a star or 2 stars.
Yes.
It means that funding for these measures is not ready, and could be collect in this year, end of this year, or the next year. Of course, it's a problem. It's a problem of that what one part of this plan is budget money, and the next part is virtual money. It's not real money in current budget. It's a problem. It's risk of work with this plan. Yes, but I think that growth of Russian economy next year is 100% depend. It's very clear from macroeconomic estimation because I understand how low is our current level of GDP, what will be our demand for population and government next year, and I think the growth rate's about 2.5–3%. It's normal. Okay. Yeah. But we need more. We need more measure of recovery of our economy, and more effective macroeconomic policy.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Alexander Dmitrievich, я прощаюсь. Всего доброго. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.
Yes.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Sergey Dmitrievich. I would like to tell those participants of our seminar who have not been acquainted to Sergey Budrunov. Sergey Budrunov is the head of the so-called Russian Free Economic Society. So he attended our conference for the first time, and now, if nobody wants to make more comments or say something, I don't see.
I would like to mention that the last point by Alexander was much more important than the writing plans, because plans are normally written to get funds, but not to make something. And part of these new funds are used to write new plans to get more funding. This is the usual circle of things, you know.
Yes. Yes, that's true. You know, I was also always, it was quite interesting for me how people working at the Institute for National Forecasting, how they make their forecasts, because they are high professionals in this field. And I appreciate a lot their work, but I cannot understand. It's something, you know, for me, it is something which normal people cannot do at all. I recall our famous Premier Chernomyrdin, who was once asked why something he had promised before had not been accomplished. And the answer was excellent, as usually. He said, well, you know, forecasting is extremely difficult thing. Then he made a big pause and suddenly added, especially when it refers to the future. Yes, so this is...
Александр Дмитриевич, это Квинт. Можно одну фразу сказать?
Sure, Vladimir.
I would like to remind to everybody only one sentence from theory of strategy. Any plan or any strategy without full scale of scheduled resources is just wishful thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it seems to me that is what the Institute for National Forecasting is taking into account always. Much more difficult, not much more difficult. It is, of course, this is also extremely difficult, but another very difficult problem is that of understanding what kind of policy will be chosen by the government, because a lot depends on the resources and a lot depends on the policies as well. And so you have also to one has to forecast both those possibilities which result from the existing resources, and at the same time you have somehow to guess what kind of policies are going to be pursued. And this is what makes it extremely difficult for me to understand how all this procedure is going on. Okay, thank you so much. In any case, I believe that we have to thank our main speakers today. They presented extremely interesting ideas and information for all of us. I also would like to thank everybody who took part in the discussion in different forms, in the forms of questions and in the form of comments. And I would like also to inform you that at our next seminar, the main speaker is going to be Leonard Martin from Germany, and he's going to speak on the monetary and regulatory response to COVID-19 in the Eurozone. So I believe that we'll continue our discussion on monetary policy next time as well, now taking into account the experience of the Eurozone. And I would also like to ask everybody who would like to be a speaker, a main speaker at our conference, just make an application. You can address it to Ekaterina Zavarzina, the secretary, scientific secretary of our seminar, or to me directly, whatever you prefer. I believe that we could continue working till the end of June. So now there is some room for being speakers at this seminar. Okay, thank you so much to everybody. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
До свидания.
Have a good evening to everybody.
Yeah. Have a nice evening.